Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Zamley with Camera's Partnership of Christians and Jews. And today our guest is founder and director of Palestinian Media Watch, Itamar Marcus. Itamar Marcus's work is tremendously valuable. I've been following it for years. I'm happy to introduce him to you all so that you can learn about where you can find excellent resources for accurate news and insights that you won't find anywhere else. Itamar, thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your schedule to enlighten us. Please tell us a little bit about Palestinian Media Watch, why you founded the organization, and some of the major insights that you're finding since you started your work.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Founded Palestinian Media Watch in 1996, and that was 3 years after the signing of the Oslo Accords. And we wanted to know what was happening in the internal Palestinian world. We knew what they were telling the international community, the media, negotiators, that they wanted peace. We wanted to know what were they telling their own people, and in particular, what are they telling to their children? And to this end, we have been literally studying everything about the PA official world, from their official statements, official broadcasts, their summer camps, their school books. Today, we follow all the social media accounts, and we know exactly what they're telling the people. And it turns out there are two different worlds. There's the English language world where they present themselves as moderate, as peace loving. And there's the Arabic language world where they not only deny Israel's right to exist, but they even deny Jews the right to exist. Their anti-Semitism is so fundamental that they even deny Jews the right to exist because the world will only become better, get fixed when all the Jews are gone. That'll bring resurrection. So it's an evil, evil society, Palestinian Authority society. And it's so important that people understand this. People understand how evil Hamas is today since October 7th. At least I hope they do.
Yeah.
Reasonable people do. But some of those reasonable people think that the Palestinian Authority is the moderate one and they're the solution. In fact, the Palestinian Authority is on issues of Jews and Israel's right to exist, and Jews, they are just as evil as Hamas. They just have been less successful at killing Israelis than Hamas.
Wow, wow. Your insights are so unique and valuable because you have such a strong team, well, yourself leading it, and I know that you have experts in the Arabic language, like native Arabic language speakers who can really comb through things like the social media rhetoric that's caught on video, the duplicity of what some of the leadership and even what some of the general people might be thinking as far as the West is so willing to consume this idea of, oh, the Palestinian people just want peace, and I'm sure there's some that do, but that the leadership is really looking for a one-state solution, so to speak. And your work is, and you personally are called into to offer that expertise to Congress folks, leaders in Europe and elsewhere. So it is really something that is so insightful. What is it? What's the main thing you would want the West or the English-speaking news-consuming public to know about what you're learning when you study or you examine the rhetoric that is inside the Palestinian world from the Fatah and the PA as well as Hamas that we aren't understanding when we see these students protesting for a two-state solution or peace or even from the river to the sea, and the news picks up on it and then of course blames Israel for something like, for example, the most recent breakdown of the ceasefire agreement. We're seeing our news reports say that the framing of the headlines are like that Israel broke the ceasefire or is ignoring the ceasefire.
So you say, what would I want people to know? And you sort of touched on this based on my previous statement. The greatest myth in the parliaments of Europe and to many people in Congress is that the Palestinian Authority sees this as a territorial conflict, and that therefore Israel, who has territory, and Israel is the one who has to compromise. When you listen to the Palestinian Authority, what they tell their people, the problem is about Jews. And let me explain what I mean by that. They teach their people that the Jewish nation never had, first of all, the Jewish people aren't a nation. They never were a nation. We never had a history in the land. But Jews wandered around the world, and every place that Jews went, they were a tragedy for the local people. We were just so evil in every country that we went to that everyone had to get rid of us, expel us, have massacres. Mahmoud Abbas
Right.
himself was interviewed on television, gave a speech a few years ago on TV, and he said that the Jews were expelled and massacred every few decades since the Middle Ages. And he said, but why was this? He said, this was because of their social role, because of their usury, because of so on and so on. The Jews brought the massacres and anti-Semitism on themselves. This comes from Mahmoud Abbas. He also recently gave a speech and he said, even Hitler and the Europeans killed them. Why? He said, Hitler thought he was bringing ruin to Germany. That's why he killed them.
قالوا إن هتلر قتل اليهود لأنهم يهود، أن أوروبا تكره اليهود لأنهم يهود. لا، يحارب هؤلاء الناس بسبب وظيفتهم الاجتماعية. حتى هتلر يعني حارب اليهود لأنهم كانوا يعملون على أساس الربا والمال، يعني يخربون من وجهة نظره هذا، ولذلك هو يكرههم.
So that according to the Palestinian Authority ideology, the Jews are this driving force of evil in the world that all the nations of the world have to protect themselves from. What did the nations of the world decide to do? They decided to steal Palestine and give it to the Jews in order to dump the Jews into Palestine and solve the Jewish problem. And that's why they say Israel has no right to exist. Because according to them, we were a colonial implant. And colonial nations wanted to solve that Jewish problem. And instead of killing us this time, they said, okay, we'll put them all in Palestine. So Israel fundamentally has no right to exist. There was an interview with a Palestinian girl on TV, probably a high school girl, and said, all the nations suffered from the Jews and they sent them here, and now we suffer from this cancer.
Wow.
Uh, After October 7th, when a lot of world leaders were coming to visit Israel, and so expressions of sympathy, on Palestinian TV, a regular researcher who appears regularly on TV said the reason they're all coming is they want to strengthen Israel. They don't want Israel to be weak because they don't want to have a reverse migration of this human waste. He said they succeeded in getting rid of the human waste. They don't want it to return. That's why they're supporting Israel.
وإنما هم يعني كأوروبا وأمريكا استطاعوا التخلص من اليهود الذين هم أنفسهم يعتبرونهم نفايات بشرية، وألقوا بهم في فلسطين. يعني أوجدوا لهم مكان بعيدا عنهم، بعيدا عن أوروبا. لا يريدون الآن هجرة معاكسة وعودة هؤلاء إلى أوروبا مرة أخرى. قالها بايدن إذا تذكر خلال الأحداث في إسرائيل، لو لم تكن إسرائيل موجودة لأوجدناها، لأوجدها لكي تستوعب هؤلاء النفايات البشرية.
So what am I saying? The conflict, according to the Palestinians, is not about land. It's about the evil Jews who no one in the world wants, and therefore they're stuck here. Now, the final level, the final stage of this Palestinian Authority ideology is that therefore the Jews have to be exterminated. And I can tell you that in the last few months, 5 times, we have heard religious figures on Palestinian Authority TV saying the following quote, Allah, count them one by one, kill them one by one, don't leave even one, about the Jews.
Wow.
Kill us, don't even leave. In other words, extermination, genocide.
اللهم عليك بأعدائك وأعداء دينك، اللهم عليك باليهود المعتدين، اللهم عليك بهم وبمن والاهم يا رب العالمين، ومن دعمهم بالموقف السياسي وبالسلاح وبالمال يا رب. اللهم اقتلهم بددا، اللهم احصهم عددا واقتلهم بددا ولا تغادر منهم احدا يا رب العالمين.
This is what the Palestinian Authority is presenting as the solution to humanity's problem with the Jews. Now, I don't have to convince anyone. This ideology is literally taken straight from Mein Kampf. It's taken straight from Hitler. Hitler said the Jews are bringing destruction around the world, and his solution was extermination. Those identical words are found in Palestinian Authority ideology today.
Wow, wow. So it really is a call to genocide in no uncertain terms. And the tragic irony of it is that the Jewish people, whether they're in Israel or elsewhere, are such a tremendous blessing to all societies. as far as the contribution to the world and everything from farming to technology to medicine. It's just amazing how they can twist that upside down. And it reminds me of the fact that this call for a genocide that we see from the Hamas charter, and as you explained, from the PA and Fatah mindset, and it's also baked into the ideologies of Iran's leadership and Houthis. I think it's on their flag even. Uh, we see the opposite being sort of peddled in our media here, which is that Israel is committing this genocide while trying to simply root out this evil. What would you say to someone who says to you, "Well, Israel is committing a genocide against the Palestinians"? What would your reaction to someone making that claim be?
Under under the rules of genocide, the people would have to be specifically targeting civilians for the purpose of genocide. Um, the ones who are actually responsible in this case for 100% of the civilian deaths in Gaza are Hamas themselves. Hamas built its entire military plan based on the fact that it was going to hide behind civilians. And this is probably the first time in history. There have been many cases in history where soldiers have used civilians, or even terrorists have used civilians as human shields. This is the first time in history where the entire military strategy of Hamas in this attack and in this war that they started was built around hiding behind humans. They built this massive infrastructure of tunnels. They had all of their terrorists hiding underneath the ground. All the civilians were on top of the ground, and the entire war was planned on the principle of attacking Israel, killing as many as they could, taking as many hostages, and then hiding under the ground and letting the civilians who were left. So that the ones who are responsible for any deaths and any and all deaths in Gaza, in the entire Gaza Strip, is Hamas. Israel, on the other hand, has been sending in water, sending in food, sending in oil, gasoline. That's not what you do if you want to do a genocide. So it's not even that it's not even close. It's exactly the opposite. Every death is Hamas's responsibility.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And maybe you can shed a little bit of insight as we're 500 plus days into the careful and traumatic response that traumatic because the Israelis are dealing with hostages and mourning their own and dealing with security issues. We're over 500 days since that horrible animalistic attack that on the civilian population from the not just the terrorists but Gazan civilians seem to have breached the fence and done some horrible things.
Thousands of them.
Um, so we had a ceasefire, we had an exchange we watched how hostages were released in the most despicable fanfare that Palestinians could come up with in order to send home the murdered and the starved still living hostages. And now that ceasefire has seemed to have broken down. At the same time, Israel is dealing with, because of the mentality of the PA that you just explained to us, they have to move in additional security into the West Bank region in order to continue to protect its population. Can you give us a little insight on what's going on now that we're into the month of March, where we had to I understand that a lot of the reservists and a lot of the folks in the military are being recalled up to deal with Gaza. What's the situation with the remaining hostages, and the mindset that's going on within the Israeli people? Because I understand it must be so traumatic. It's the desire to get the captives back and yet maintain security and root out the danger. How is that balance all happening and what's going on the ground in Israel in that regard?
Well, all the things are connected, including what's happening in Judea and Samaria. We'll start with, as you point out, this horrific dilemma that the Israeli leadership has to deal with, and that is, do we release the thousands of terrorists that Hamas is demanding in exchange for getting our hostages? And the reason why it's not just that they're terrorists who've murdered. They're terrorists who we know will murder again. According to government statistics, Shabak statistics, 82% of these terrorists go back and murder. The terrorists who planned October 7th had all been in jail for life, with life sentences, and were released in the Gilad Shalit deal, so that we've paid in the past with vast numbers of people who've been killed because we released terrorists in extortion deals like this. Now, Israel, because of a lot of pressure that was put on by the families, has decided to give in, will release literally thousands of terrorists in exchange for getting our hostages released. Now, with those terrorists going into Judea and Samaria, Israel's decided that we can't make the mistakes we've made in the past. And we've gone in and we've decided to not wait for the terrorists to try their attacks and stop them before they attack. We are going and rooting them out. We are going into their hideouts. We are going into the cities where we know they have been launching their terror attacks, and we're going to destroy them now. We're not going to wait for an October 7th from Judea and Samaria. We are ripping up the roads because they're putting bombs under the roads to kill Israelis. Where we're finding terrorists in buildings, we're knocking down the buildings. We're not going to go room to room and get our soldiers killed. In other words, they're getting everything that they deserve. The terrorists are getting what they deserve. And of course, the international community and a lot of the media will then look at the buildings that have been destroyed and say, oh, these poor people lost their building. Well, why are you having terrorists in your building? Israel's not destroying them for no reason. So that's what you're having here. You're having Israel going to prevent a repeat of October 7th. And then when you talk about the media, you're having the media, from its perspective, not looking at why Israel's doing this, not looking at the horrific terrorists that Israel is releasing, but just decides to look at, oh, the poor civilians who now don't have a house. Well, let them blame Hamas, let them blame the Palestinian Authority as well for them not having a house.
And what is the role? I think a lot of Western viewers who are watching this sort of play out on the world stage and not getting the insight to, the full reasons and necessities that Israel takes the measures that it takes. How is Qatar as an agent in this negotiating activities to get a ceasefire deal or resume a ceasefire deal or get hostages out or calculate the number of released convicted terrorists against these innocent people that were trying to retrieve back from Gaza? Can you explain why that's such a dangerous actor in the mix and why it shouldn't be trusted?
Qatar is the reason that October 7th happened. Just know that the Qatar is an Islamist nation with a radical Islamic ideology connected to Muslim Brotherhood. They believe in ultimate subjugation of all of humanity under Islam, either by what they call population jihad or by violent jihad in the end. So this is Qatar. And that's the reason why all the political leaders of Hamas have been living in Qatar at the expense of the Qatari government. So that Qatar has been and Hamas has built this incredible infrastructure of terror in the Gaza Strip with an underground tunnel network that's larger than the British underground in London. That's how massive it is, and they've done this with Qatari money, as well as other money, as well as Iranian money. But Qatar has been a major force behind this. So Qatar is a terror funding organization, a terror supporting organization, is no different than Hamas. Now, once the hostages were taken, the world should have put the pressure on Hamas because Hamas has built, on Qatar. Because Qatar has built Hamas into what it is, they have incredible power over Hamas. And had the world not put pressure on Israel, but the world put pressure on Qatar from the first moment, had the United States and the European governments threatened Qatar with complete isolation, political breaking off of diplomatic relations, we could have had our hostages back within a few weeks. Wow. Because Qatar would have insisted on it. And the international community, though, tragically decided to create an equivalence here. Okay, let's see what we have to do. Hamas is an actor. I don't know what they thought. I don't know what they were thinking, but the world handled this terribly, and Israel had no choice but to go in and fight against this villain Hamas. And tragically, they've been meanwhile murdering our hostages all along.
Yeah, because I mean, I really believe that in the West, the news consumer who's not privy to what you have insight to, and bad and at the mercy of bad reporting, really believes that Qatar is this Middle Eastern entity that, has a vested interest in helping get these hostages out, and I don't trust that for a second. And speaking of these financial tentacles that go in and fund the terror tunnels and the lavish living of the leadership, we are seeing on our side of the ocean, well, at least with this new administration, some crackdown on these nefarious use of at least American funding. UNRWA, of course, has been exposed in their role in aiding and even participating in October 7th and hiding of hostages. We're also seeing USAID get sort of cracked down on because we're finding out money was used. This pay to slay policy that happens under the PA and I guess under Gazan governments too, that obviously violates the Taylor Force Act. We're seeing a crackdown on that, at least from the current administration here. But then we saw Abbas sort of, and I think you and the Palestinian Media Watch, palwatch.org, was one of the only ones that I saw report that the PA publicly said, "Oh, we're ending the program," and yet to their own people basically said they're just rerouting the funding, they're renaming it. Can you explain a little bit about what's going on there? Because you were, I believe, the only site I saw that reported on the reality there.
Yeah. So the Palestinian Authority rewards terrorists. When they go to prison, they start getting a salary. The longer they're in prison, the higher the salary goes up, reaches up to 12,000 shekel, which is almost 4,000 US dollars, which is about 3.5 to 4 times the average Palestinian salary. So they reward terrorists with an enormous amount of money, and they've been doing this for many, many years. Essentially, this was the amount since 2011. This is the amount that they've been rewarding them. And Palestinian Media Watch actually was the one who discovered this and exposed this, who brought this to Congress, brought it to parliaments. Eventually, the United States passed the Taylor Force Act, named after an American veteran who was murdered in Tel Aviv, Taylor Force. He was murdered in Tel Aviv. And we showed the videos and documented that the family of the murderer was going to be rewarded for life with a monthly stipend of 1,400 shekel for life, just because their son was a murderer in Tel Aviv and murdered Taylor Force. So there was outrage in the United States. There was outrage Taylor Force's family, and they all lobbied. And in the end, the United States passed this bill that prohibits American funding, almost all American funding of the PA, if they continue having this program. This was passed during the Trump administration, the first one. He cut off all funding to the PA, as he should have, following American law. The Biden administration then bypassed the Taylor Force Act by finding excuses. Okay, this is actually humanitarian aid, giving money to USAID to pass on to different programs, giving extra money to UNRWA, which was then supporting terror and supporting ultimately the Palestinian Authority. So that now Trump is back in power, and he's decided to implement the Taylor Force Act as it should be implemented. It's American law. Mm-hmm. The Palestinian Authority is on the verge of financial collapse. And so not because they don't support terror, but because they're on the verge of financial collapse, they said, okay, we're canceling this program now, and now we can get American funding. We're canceling our pay for slave program. Now, what we discovered, and we found it in the speech by Abbas and some other people, they're not stopping the payments. They're just sending the payments through a different program. They have a new infrastructure that's been set up that is now dealing with all the social welfare cases in the country, and they're claiming this is a social welfare case that will. So the terrorists who are in prison and the released terrorists are still going to continue to get their money. In fact, Mahmoud Abbas said they're going to get the same payments that they had before, but they're getting it from a different account. And what's outrageous is that the international community and a lot of the international media is so anxious to portray the Palestinian Authority as moderate that they gave so much exposure to the fact that the PA was canceling this program. And I don't even think they mentioned, many of them, that they're actually not canceling the program. They're just having the payments come from a different account.
So just a lot of financial two-stepping, um, massaging the book, so to speak. So it's really a tragedy, and I hope that more Americans are understanding this truth. We're going to push out your reporting on this because it's so important, and I hope that our administration also audits those things and does not resume funding. I hope they don't. I do want to ask you one other question about some contemporary news that we see in particularly in the Christian media here in the West. So we often examine the experience of Arab Christians in Judea and Samaria and Bethlehem and particularly. And we are noticing that out of the news, particularly the World Council of Churches and the Catholic News Agency, that there's this consistent narrative among the Christian community and among its, religious leaders that, the Jewish people were not part of the land. They pick up this colonial, European colonial settlement narrative. And then all of the tragedies that are going on in that community economically, the tourism is down, of course. There's COVID, and then the war resulting from October 7th. When you explain sort of the mindset of Hamas and the PA and Fatah and how that really trickled into all of the civilian population because of things like the school books and the camps that you've exposed for over 20 years now, how much of that mindset is also baked into the very small Christian Arab community? What's your insight on that and that suffering that people in the West are seeing this narrative that, well, the Christians in the Middle East or in Bethlehem are suffering because of Israeli actions, whether it's military actions or other economic forces. Can you speak to that?
Well, first of all, no Christians who are in Judea and Samaria and the Arab cities and the Palestinian Authority cities of Judea and Samaria could actually put the blame for Christian suffering on the PA, because if they did, they would very likely end up in a Palestinian Authority jail being tortured or have some trumped up charges, because there's no such thing as democracy and proper due process there. Political enemies are arrested. Some political enemies end up being killed. So that's the first thing. There's one of the Palestinians who works with us once was meeting with me together with foreign members of parliament, and they asked him how many Palestinians have opinions like yours that are so, that realize that Israel is your friend and Israelis are your friend more than the Palestinian Authority. And this Palestinian said to them, I don't know, because I'm afraid to tell people my opinions, because if they tell the Palestinian police, they'll end up tortured in a Palestinian jail. So this is the Palestinian Authority, and this was a Muslim who was saying. Now, the Christians are in the same situation. If they're going to start pointing out how they've suffered, look, when you just have to look at the numbers. When Israel ruled Judea and Samaria, the population of Bethlehem was in the area, some different estimates, 60 to 75%, or maybe even 80% Christian, based on different estimates now going back. Under the Palestinian Authority, since Israel gave it over to them, the Christian population of Bethlehem is down to around 10%, maybe even less. The Palestinian Authority very much is very close to Hamas in that it's Islamist, it's Islamic supremacist in all of its beliefs. So they portray themselves as defending Christianity and the Christian holy sites because they have to tell that to the Western world, to the Christian world of Europe, to Americans. They want them. But in fact, Christians have suffered tremendously. I remember in the early days of the PA, there were Christian girls who were being raped in Bethlehem by Palestinian Authority police. And then we'd read the articles of the policemen were detained, but a few days later, they turned out that they were released. So the Palestinian Authority doesn't care about the Christian population. They will use the Christian population as a smokescreen to claim that they are defending them. Now, the aside from this, I don't know how Christians can actually support the Palestinian Authority just because of the way they insult Christianity and the fundamental beliefs of Christianity. First of all, this myth that Jesus was a Palestinian, of course, is a complete contradiction to the Christian Bible, which makes it very clear that he's a Judean. So that's the first thing. Second, they call him a Muslim. They say he didn't preach Christianity, he preached Islam. Yes, this is according to Palestinian authorities. By the way, it's in the Quran as well, that Jesus preached Islam, but the Christians distorted it, and that's why Muhammad came to correct the distortions that the Christians had made. In fact, you'll see it in the Quran. He says, I'm not coming to something new, I'm coming only to correct your mistakes. So this was, and the Palestinian authorities adopted this, and the religious leaders talk about this, that Christianity was the religion of Jesus. He was a prophet, but he was I'm sorry, not Christianity, that Islam was Jesus' religion. He was a Muslim prophet. In addition, they say that he was the first Palestinian shaheed. Now, shaheed is translated in English as martyr, but it's much, much worse than being a martyr. Shaheed means the person died for Allah and immediately is rewarded by being shipped off to paradise and getting 72 virgins as his reward for being a shaheed. This is not just, some people laugh about this. This is so real. This is so real that when you look at the death announcements for terrorists in the Palestinian Facebook pages, Fatah announces the death of, a heroic shaheed, a heroic martyr, so-and-so, so-and-so, and then they'll write, the wedding will be tomorrow at so-and-so, so-and-so o'clock. In other words, that's the burial is called the wedding. That's the word that they use. They absolutely, and we've heard, of course, Palestinian suicide bombers going on their suicide missions and leaving these videos saying, oh, don't cry for me, don't be sad for me, mother, I'm going to meet the virgins. We had a recent amazing interview. A grandmother described how her grandson went out on a terror attack, hoping to be killed, knowing he was going to be killed. And she described how he dressed himself up like for a wedding. He put on cologne, he showered. In other words, he was going to his wedding and he was going to even put on cologne. This was on Palestinian TV. So the whole family gets involved in this horrific. So getting back to Jesus now, that's what they're saying. Jesus is now in heaven, according to Palestinian ideology, with 72 virgins. So anyone who is a believing Christian will be horrified by all the insults that the Palestinian Authority is saying is telling Christians. And I just don't understand how so many Catholic organizations and possibly and others, support this when they're supporting people who absolutely are making a mockery of them.
Yeah, it's really important that our network and our viewers hear what you're saying and gain insight to those realities of what these people believe and how the Christians in the area are extorted, so to speak, to either keep their mouths shut if they're aware of the truth, for fear of their own lives or the safety of their families, or they're otherwise brainwashed. And in the West, many among the Christian community are so willing to accept this equivalency that the Muslims in the PA or in Gaza are just trying to live peacefully and coexist, and that their relationship with the Christians in the area have always been pristine and one of common respect, which we know that's not true because it's first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, which is also out of the Islamic writings. Itamar, what else can we know? I'm going to be sharing your website and encourage our listeners and viewers to follow your work on Twitter because your organization, you in particular, you're very good about very timely reality checks on what's going on in the news cycle, as well as exposing the history of not just the 20 years of indoctrination that the Palestinian citizenry have endured, but even before that, what's been going on. What else can our viewers know about what to follow and how to contact you, or at least follow your website? And what other bits of information should we be aware of as of today, 500 plus days into this horror of captives held in Israel, and Israel making deals with the devil, so to speak, and we're watching this from the West?
I would say go into our website, and Camera is really a very good organization to work with us. We have in different cities, we have media groups that work with PMW, and they literally follow our website. And when there are journalists who write incorrect stories, or not just journalists, but when there are politicians who make incorrect statements, we suggest to them that they take our material, have meetings with them, and say, we want you to look at this. We think it will be valuable for you. We think that it would help your policies. It will help you this. And then they just show them. And in fact, we often, when we know that they're having these meetings, they'll contact us, and then we will send them even additional information to make the point or help them create a PowerPoint. So this is the way people can work with PMW, is to, when you hear terrible things about Israel and you have the answers on our website, then contact us, use it, create a PowerPoint, go and sit them down and say, hey, wait a second. And don't be aggressive, of course, so that won't work. You don't say, oh, you're all wrong. Say, we have information that we think can be helpful for you in your reporting or in your policies, and then let it all be shown. So we love to work with anyone who wants to work with us.
That's encouraging. And I want to encourage folks in the church as well. We're seeing some questionable attitudes come from pulpits and Sunday school teachers and such. And I would say that the Camera's website, as well as the Palestinian palwatch.org is Itamar's website. That is a treasure trove of just accurate data to say, look, here's the reality of the situation. It can indeed change how you present a topic or an issue. Itamar, I really appreciate all the time you gave us today, and I hope to have you back sometime soon with updates. Your insights really do bring to light what we need to know here in the West. The Christian community, the Jewish community, the community at large, they need to be aware of your fact finding and your expertise in the Arabic language, so that dual nature of what's being put out to the world is exposed and understood moving forward with things like policies and responses.
Okay, thank you for inviting me, and let's hope, I'm sure it will impact on the people who hear it.
Thank you so much. Shavua Tov.
So,